Well, from debt to corruption and manufacturing, the Raila Karua ticket is promising Wonderland. But what are the finer details? Right now on the program, we interrogate the packed 10-point agenda and the ambitious 100-day plan on Newsnight. And joining me to do that is the Deputy Chief Agent, Azimio Oka Coalition Party, Caroline Karugu. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Together
with the CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs, not a stranger on the program, Kwame Owino. Welcome as well.
Thank you.
Carol, I'll actually start with you because I did see you yesterday, actually on stage. I think you're presenting the Azimio La Kinamama aspect of the manifesto. 24 hours after that launch, a lot of discussion has been generated. I'm sure you've been following what's happening online. But there's a question that I posed to the Deputy Presidential Candidate, Martha Karua, that I want to pose to you right now.
Right.
Where will the money to fund these ambitious proposals come from, bearing in mind we find ourselves in a country, in a space with very little fiscal room to breathe? You've watched some of our news stories. Debt ceiling, 10 trillion.
Absolutely.
Manufacturers complaining about taxes that they say are completely unpredictable as well.
Right.
Where is that fiscal room to implement these promises?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me and for giving us a chance to elaborate what we're calling the promise of this country. When you ask me where is money going to come from, I think that's the easiest question that we can answer as Azimio people, because we also know that we are in a country that we are told is hemorrhaging about 2 billion shillings a day. And that is why the greater part of our manifesto is about how to curb corruption and how to ensure that monies that are supposed to go to public initiatives actually do reach there. So where is the money going to come from? We know where the money is hemorrhaging from.
Illuminate the rest of us. I want specifics.
Wonderful. Good. So we are told, you know, a lot of money that is supposed to go into, for instance, healthcare doesn't go into healthcare. Money that is supposed to go into water, for instance, doesn't reach the end consumer. And I have worked in the devolved units. You know, I work also as Nyeri Deputy Governor. And I can tell you from the grassroots that these things are real, that budgets are red. And we hear, for instance, right now we are running on a 2.9 trillion budget. But on the ground, if you ask Wanjiku on the ground, they don't feel the 2.9 trillion. Why? Because there is a huge hemorrhage of public funds in this country. And the sad bit about it is that we haven't seen seriousness in looking for these perpetrators and bringing them to book. And that is why the Azimio Manifesto is premised on 3 thematic areas. The first thematic area is on economic revolution, and I'll speak a lot about it. The second is on social transformation. That is the most popular one that you have had on the campaign trails. And the third one, and I think, in my view, is going to be the make or break, and is our differentiator from, for instance, our competitors, is the issue of governance in this country and ethics, ethos, and integrity of this nation. Okay.
And one last one before Kwame comes in. So what are these loopholes that you have identified in the process? We have a 2010 constitution, we have empowered agencies, we have an auditor general who continuously audits. What is going to be different in the Azimio government that the billions we are told is stolen every year will suddenly not be stolen anymore? What's that you will bring to the table?
Number one, we will be a government that is going to, one, uphold integrity. We are a government that right now on the campaign trail, you're hearing us at the grassroots saying, go and elect individuals. Do not go and elect parties. Do not go and be carried away by a wave. Go and look at the integrity of the leaders that you put in office. Already Baba has shown us, you know, for instance, by how he has gone with the first person that he nominated as his running mate, a lady who has fought for this nation, for the integrity of this nation, a lady who is known to be no-nonsense on matters integrity and the rule of law. And therefore, there is no other way we can tell, for instance, the first step that we can make as an Azimio government than where it matters most is the people that we put in office. Because good plans, you know, can be made. I mean, all these manifestos are going to be brilliant, beautifully written with wonderful words and figures. But the differentiator is the people who are going to implement the manifestos. What are the characters of these people that we're going to put in office? That, in my view, is the elephant in the room.
Okay. I have many more questions, but let me allow Kwame to come in. Kwame, thanks for making time for us this evening. And I'm sure you've heard the plan to fund the budget by sealing the loopholes, where, we have all sorts of figures sort of how much the country loses every year on the same. But what was your initial feeling when you got your hands finally on this manifesto in terms of its intention and whether you feel it stayed true to that page by page?
All right.
A snapshot for you.
Yes, thanks. I think the first thing that, so first I and one of my colleagues had an opportunity and we wrote an article very, very quickly drafted yesterday.
I had a chance to read it.
Yes. So one of the things that we assess is, does an administration that is coming in or coalition that hopes to govern us from August or later, really understand what the functions of government is. Because government is not a social worker dishing out money to everybody who has one need or the other. Government works on collective goods. And if you look at Azimio, they get some things right, but let me focus on one that concerns me. I don't think there's a commitment to say we will only do the things that government should do and let the public decide for themselves, or people, whether it's farms or households, decide for themselves what to do. So my fear again here is, in spite of what Carol says, is that we will find a government that has 3.2 trillion, which is available this year, but spreads it too thin because you're trying to do everything. So if there's one thing the Jubilee administration's lessons tell us, is that in a society such as ours, government has to choose what things to do and do them extremely well, as opposed to trying to do everything from laptops to everything, stadiums, providing cylinders to stadiums, to meat, right? And Azimio repeats that because in one part they say that one of the things they'll do is that they'll be exporting organic meat. Why don't you leave that to Kenyan farmers? Why do you want to export meat when kids can't even go to school? So my thinking is about a question of focus. And because they have a business approach, the first thing it'll have to do is just basically tightly dial on what it'll do well, knowing that there's a big debt overhang. So some things might be good to do, but not necessarily doable. So choosing tightly what will be the priorities is something I'm not too sure I didn't get from this.
Carl,
however, there's a commitment. There's a commitment to devolution, which tells me something about the leadership and perhaps the other people in Azimio, which is there's a very firm commitment to devolution, which is just basically to say we'll strengthen devolution. One, the responsibilities that the Constitution accorded to county governments, which have not been completely transferred by Jubilee, we will do it. They say that. Secondly, we will send the funds from 15 to 35%, so we can hold them to that. But even more importantly, commit to the fact that we'll have the disbursement of funds done by an independent body, which does not starve counties of funds. That's an extremely revolutionary thing.
Do you think 35% is achievable with our current prevailing circumstances, Kwame?
If the functions are transferred, then yes. Because if you transfer function, yes, then you won't keep doctors in Nairobi. Because if you transfer them to counties, then it means necessarily that that money must follow. Because the principle of devolution is money follows functions. So if obviously those functions are done, then obviously the money to go with it should. I'm not too sure how 35%.
Let me begin with the first statement. He said he's accused Azimio of trying to be baba na mama na kila kitu to all Kenyans. And he says, let government stick to its functions. Should Azimio form government? You can respond to that. And
well, thank you very much. First is to say that a manifesto is a promise to the people and not a work plan. We will come up with a work plan that then gives the priority areas of where to start. For instance, off the top of my mind, if you ask me, what is a priority area and where is the pain point right now for Kenyans? Kenyans are hungry. When we go on the campaign trail, after we speak to people, they point at their tummies and say, tuko na njaa. Kenyans are hungry. The cost of living is unbearable. So for us, that is the #1 priority. And you heard Baba alluding to it yesterday when he said the first thing he will address is the cost of living. That is the price of food, the price of cooking oil, the price of unga. Through subsidies, that will be addressed, and you will see that in the first supplementary budget, for instance, in the Baba's government. So the manifesto that we launched yesterday, and by the way, it is 86, 87 pages, and for us, it's the abridged version. There is the bigger version that then details everything to do with the work plan. And it's also good to, and I like the way my friend Kwame is saying, we don't understand government, as Azimio. I think he wouldn't be more correct about that. Baba and Martha Karua have been outside government for a very long time. Unlike our competitors who have been in government, they can be forgiven if you say, you know, there are a few things they need to learn. And when I was speaking to him when we were having coffee right before we came in, and he said, do you guys understand even how to, for instance, manage debt? And I say, we probably do not even understand the magnitude of debt, just like all other Kenyans, because we haven't been in government before. So perhaps maybe the first thing we would do is audit that debt.
Well, part of you are from Jubilee, which is government.
Well, yes, but you see, now it's a coalition. A coalition of not only Jubilee and ODM, but of 25 different parties. So Jubilee is 1 out of 25% of the Azimio coalition. And therefore, I understand, you know, when he says we probably need some time to understand what are the roles. But we strongly believe that this nation has enough resources to be able to, for instance, empower its people, to be able to spur economic activities so that there is meaningful contribution, for instance, to the exchequer. We believe that this nation is rich enough to create opportunities for the youth and women to play meaningfully in the contribution and building of this nation. And we have no doubt in our minds that the way we have looked at over the years, looking at the trend analysis of how monies have been used, how monies have been lost, and the amount of scandals that we hear year in, year out, that this nation, if only were in the right hands, we would be able to recoup that money and put it in the right places. When
it comes to the war on corruption, and you actually started with that quite early on, a lot of Kenyans remember how previous regimes came in with a lot of gusto, talking about the war on corruption. We remember the NAC revolution 2002, took power, you know, citizens were carrying out citizens' arrest and affecting out all sorts of things. It was an exciting time. But something happened a year or two into that regime when corruption scandals or revelations of corruption scandals suddenly came out and the momentum fizzled out. Well, the Jubilee coalition then came in, same thing. There was a new talk of, you know, we're going to lock them up and that sort of thing. How will you ensure that the Azimio promise and you know, the Raila Karua ticket really is being pledged as an anti-corruption ticket will see through the season, bearing in mind how many interests, you have a coalition, many players. How will you keep the momentum of the war on corruption?
I think that's a fairly easy question, Wahiga. During these times when these promises have been given, we have fallen for it. Every year, every election cycle, we have fallen for it.
What's different this time round?
We have, listen, these people have been on the ticket saying they are the fighters of corruption. Another ticket came and said they are the fighters of corruption. We ignored Raila Odinga. We ignored Martha Karua and chose the better speaking, the better orators, the younger people, and look at where we are today. So I think it is time to give, and when we give Raila Odinga and Martha Karua a chance to lead this nation, I believe, and a lot of Kenyans, I'm sure, believe like me, that this country is going to be in the hands of reformists. Truly people who have been in the mud, trying to look for a chance to reform this nation, saying that this nation is not doing well. But while we're listening to them, could we hear any of them? We looked at all other things but what they were saying. So this is a chance as good as any other that we have had before to give people who have been wanting to lead us and have been saying this country is in the wrong hands. This country needs to be serious about corruption. This country needs to be serious about its justice system. This country needs to be serious about reviving, for instance, the manufacturing industry. We have seen, if you look at the statistics, year on year, our contribution of the manufacturing sector to GDP is just dwindling. I mean, if you look at last year, I think it was at about 11.6%. This year, I mean, well, no, last year, that was the year before, that is 2019. 2020, at 7.5%. I can tell you without a doubt that it will dwindle further. So what does that mean? We are not producing. We are a consuming nation. We are not manufacturing. We are not nurturing. We're not nurturing and incubating small businesses and small manufacturing, manufacturing businesses in the villages. And having worked in, for instance, the devolved units, I want to tell you that this story is real. The young people are coming out of TVETs, coming out of colleges, looking for jobs. Looking for jobs in the office. as opposed to asking how can I produce, or how can I manufacture, or how can I be my own boss.
And when we're going to come to manufacturing shortly, let me allow Kwame to respond. We've talked one or two topics with her. I want to hear your thoughts on the war on corruption and what the next government will find when they attempt, or should they attempt to tackle corruption, bearing in mind it has metamorphosized in its shape and form. Carry on, Kwame.
Yes. Let's start with this. The statement, I mean, in very early pages states that there'll be zero tolerance on corruption. But that's not peculiar. I think every manifesto will say that, right? So again, while I understand that a manifesto is just, or a plan such as this is just basically a statement of what the intent would be, right? But not necessarily the operational details. I think that this administration would be in for a shock if they were elected and simply went with sloganeering. Nobody is better at sloganeering than people in the public sector who are corrupt. Nobody is better than sloganeering than that. So let me tell you, for instance, I mean, I must say this with respect and I must be circumspect. I work in an office, a small office that's very close to the Ministry of Lands. And one day I had, well, maybe I was eavesdropping. So I had two people say, a gentleman who was very frustrated came out of the office, and he was a bit elderly. And he says that, he said in Kiswahili, and because my Kiswahili is not very posh, let me not say it. But what he said is this: if this building came down, half of Kenya's corruption problems would be solved. And he says that, and he's
all due respect to all those who work at the Ministry
Now,
of
this
Lands.
is a building in which every floor, yes, of course, with respect, but I'm talking about the real feeling of Kenyans who interact with them. So maybe they're not corrupt, but Kenyans see them as deeply corrupt, and that building representing 50% of the corruption in this country. I suspect this guy was exaggerating. But what he's saying is that regardless of the fact that you have statements out there, this is a corruption-free zone, right? We talk the talk, but we don't walk it. That's the point. So if Martha Karua and Raila Odinga come in thinking that it will be enough to sloganeer around corruption, they'll find very eloquent boys and girls in those offices who will wait them out. Say that thing, but ensure that when the Auditor General finds out, we'll come and find that you bought goods worth 2 billion, they were not delivered. That's it. So it actually has to be a structural reform of the public sector. That's how 2 billion shillings is getting lost every year. Every day.
How long would it take to structurally reform the civil sector?
To be honest, I do not know, but you have to start.
100 days?
Oh, no, 100 days is not enough. 100 days is enough to stamp your authority and say, look, we are actually doing. But what these people will do is they'll want to wait you out. They'll stay in and say, fine, if you want us to put on badges, if you want us to do all these stickers, we will stick them. The point is it's a structural thing. And no administration that comes in without reforming the way government does its business, especially in the purchase of goods and services, will make headway. Because that's where most of the money that President Uhuru is frustrated is leaking through is. And if you look at the Auditor General's reports every year, you just see money leaking. Hundreds of millions being paid for goods that are not delivered. Not delivered. And that's how come you have public sector workers, when we had demonetization, buying 16 apartments in one weekend and buying it off cash. That has to be public money, I suspect. So yes, it's a far deeper problem than you can do by simply saying zero tolerance on corruption.
Maybe my question then should have been to you before she responds is, what would you have wanted to see in the manifesto in regards to the war on corruption to convince you that this is the way to go?
I actually think that if I was the president, Kenya doesn't lack money. I actually would get an inspector general, rather, let me say this, a foreigner coming from a very radical approach. Somebody who's done investigative approach. Yeah, certainly. I don't mean white skin, but a foreigner. Somebody who is not connected to the political stuff here. Give him authority as a corruption czar in the president's office and actually ask him to look through, to look through all the reports that the Auditor General has made and simply ask people to leave. That's it. It has to be something more radical than a statement about tolerance. Nobody in Kenya, I mean, apparently all of us have zero tolerance in corruption, but it's the fastest growing sector in Kenya, right?
Caroline, before I ask another question, let me give you a chance to respond.
That is true. I just, first of all, honestly want to agree with him that in every, public office, there is that big signage that you are now in a corruption-free zone in every public office. So, yeah, I hear him on sloganeering. What I disagree with him is on the solution that we have to get a foreigner. I think, and honestly so, that this country has enough capability. We have enough people who are well-read, who understand where the problem is. We don't have to go out of the country. And by the way, this country also has people who are extremely patriotic, who will understand the problem of this nation. And given an opportunity, they are happy to regularize even matters corruption. So I wouldn't go for a foreigner. I will go for a Kenyan who understands what this means, what curbing corruption means in the long term, not only today, but for the nation we want to bequeath our children. On the issue of the Auditor General, I mean, they have done a good job, but if you look through our manifesto, you will see we are proposing some reforms even within the Auditor General's office. I don't want to say that, you know, we have not 100% trust in them, but we think there are things that can be done better and more efficiently in the Auditor General's office, including, for instance, you know, the audits that they carry out in the devolved units in the counties. You know, how do they go about them? And is any action taken, or do you just, you know, do you follow up for action, or you know? So I think, as Azimio we are saying, it's reforms all around. You know, we're not saying that there's any institution that is perfect. We're talking of police reforms. Why? Because we think they're okay. I mean, they have come a few years, but we think that it's also time to relook into some of these institutions that deliver to the public.
Let me add one thing before you go about it. Maybe true. I mean, if you can find a Kenyan who can do that, that's fine. But the one area where Kenya is completely sick is procurement fraud, which is basically supplies to government. People sell to government bottles of water that's available in your supermarket with a markup, right? At 100 shillings for 600 shillings. 600 shillings. Something unique happens in government tendering committees. So if you cannot, no, be honest. So basically, I mean, a 500% markup over a bottle of water, over all three several government offices eventually adds up to the 2 billion that President Kenyatta has been crying about. So if you don't fix it there might be something to do about a policeman taking some money to let somebody drive and all that. And that's equally unethical. But the point I'm saying about where big money leaks is basically
Kenya's
procurement.
Fundamental problem.
Yeah.
Fundamental corruption problem is purchasing, government purchase. It's available. I mean, computers that are available in some places for 40,000, 50,000 shillings is bought by government for 10 times the fee. And all the boxes were ticked. Something about tendering committees in this country is very rotten. So if you don't start there, and all you do is harass policemen to do one thing or the other, I think you'll be looking on the wrong end of the telescope.
Carol, I don't know if you're going to respond to that, but also let's talk a bit about this 6,000 Kenya shillings stipend. One of the landmark promises, a social protection program to deliver this to about, 2 million households?
Yep.
And the question that then keeps begging off the back of that is, we've seen the challenges that have dogged some of these social protection programs for wazés, for the vulnerable as well.
Yeah.
What will make this one different this time round with the lessons learned from previous cash transfer programs?
A few things. One, the pressure on the ground. Two, the fact that it is a key promise item, you know, for the Azimio government. If you look at 2 million households at 6,000 shillings, we're looking at 1.2 billion shillings a month. In a year, that would be about 14.4 billion shillings.
I actually think it's 12 billion.
It's 12 billion.
It's 12 billion. Yes, it's 12 billion. 12 billion.
For the year.
Yeah, for the year. So if you look at that, I think 12 billion shillings for a country that is leaking 2 billion shillings. If once again we go back to where this conversation began, if we are able to tighten these loose ends and, you know, nip some of these corruption issues at the bud, if we are able to seal some of these, you know, holes that are hemorrhaging public funds, a lot of these things do not even become a cost. And I honestly think that 2 million households in this country is really a modest figure. For a country that we are told that 40% of us are living below the poverty line, taking 2 million households is really the bare minimum. However, it's realistic because when we, for instance, in Nyeri County, we were a pilot county for the UHC program, and one of the things that we did is go into a research phase, you know, understanding our people and, you know, perhaps what are the level, how many indigents we have, for instance, in the county. And I can tell you, beyond any reasonable doubt, the 2 million shillings, 2 million households are, are really a modest figure. A lot more families would need to be, to be reached out to. But we in the Azimio government, and if you look through our manifesto, we are calling it an industrialization manifesto. This nation has reached the level of industrializing. The Kenyatta government was about liberating the country and freedom. The Moi government concentrated on education, and I know we had a lot of arguments about how, President Moi chose to go about education and whether he was building on education and not the infrastructure. Kibaki, took over, and his was about regularizing a lost economy. President Uhuru has taken over, and let's give it to him, hands down, has made a tremendous investment in infrastructure of this country. Now, for you to industrialize, infrastructure is really the bare minimum. For a country to be industrialized, for us to think about what we are calling this Azimio promise for Kenya, we wouldn't do it if President Uhuru had not made the amount of investment he has made in infrastructure. Because if, for instance, you have factories producing goods, but no roads and no railways and no airspace, for instance, to ensure that these goods get to market, then it would be a zero-sum game, so to speak. So every government has its ticket item, and for us, it's about industrializing this nation. And it's a two-pronged approach. Industrializing this nation to be able to create meaningful jobs, especially for the youth of this country. Not to make the youth reliant of government subsidies and funds and, like you said, Wahiga, we cannot run a nation of people who always omba serikali. Ninaomba serikali, naomba serikali. Where does that money come from? The role of government is really not directly give jobs to its people. The role of government is to spur economic activity so that Kenyans or its people are able to plug into that economic activity and be able to benefit themselves. So for us as the Azimio government, we will be focusing in really paying a lot of attention on how exactly we can grow the manufacturing component to GDP and the component of manufacturing, for our people. And when we speak manufacturing, sometimes when we speak manufacturing, people think of the big industries, and the big industries are wonderful. We can see, for instance, what Kikotech, what Mama Ngilu is doing with Kikotech, and what, she was just sharing with me today with her Kikotech. She's been able to instantly been able to employ 1,000 youths. So it is doable. But when we speak manufacturing, we also look at cottage industries. Now, Wahiga, I do not know if you are aware that in this country, in all our constituencies, we have a 2 to 5 acre land owned by government. For the Kenya Industrial Estates and for the constituency industrial development centers. These were an idea, brainchild of Mwai Kibaki under his economic stimulus. To
set this land aside.
Now, to set the land aside and even to develop some of these CIDCs. Now, when I, went around, for instance, in Nyeri County, I found some were not constructed, some were constructed and really not finished, some were constructed, finished. We have some people occupying them, but they don't have three-phase power. So one of the things that the Azimio government will do is audit all these CIDCs as incubation centers for our youth to develop cottage industries. Because when we think industry, we're not only thinking the big industries, we're thinking the cottage industries as well. The big industries, we are looking at the one county, one product. You'll have a look at it in our manifesto where we're saying in every county we should be able to come up with one industry. Every county should be able to pick one industry. For instance, I was in Garissa the other day, and the governor told me, do you know all this gypsum that is being used? They come for the raw materials, they go to another country and process it and bring it back and sell it to the country. Why wouldn't we have, for instance, a gypsum manufacturing industry in Garissa?
Okay, let me get a quick reaction. Kwame, 2 thoughts. One, pesa kwa jamii. How do you ring fence that? You've told us if you want to clean up corruption in this country, clean up procurement departments in government.
Yes.
Let's talk about ring-fencing a project like Pesa kwa Jamii. How do we ensure that it wouldn't become a problem later on? Okay,
I think the public discourse makes it look like that's the most fantastic idea that, that Azimio actually think that's one of the ideas for which they should be given more credit. Let me explain why. And I think they've been browbeaten to try and hide it because everybody says, how will you afford it? But let me say why I think it's a good idea. So first, according to the census, the country has 12.3 million households, 2019. So maybe today it's a couple of 100,000 more, maybe 13 million at the most. So if you take 2 million of the poorest households in Kenya and provide the household, not person, with 6,000 shillings for each household, you will make substantial change in people's lives in the ability to do basic things. Afford food for kids, which is important because something like 10–15% of Kenyan children are stunted because of inability to find food. Just basic health that would improve. And a few things that they could actually improve within the household is substantial. So that's one. So in terms of the idea, these ideas have also been tested, including private firms that have tested direct income and stuff like that in Kenya here. So on the whole, it would be equivalent to 144 billion, 12 billion a month, 144 billion over 12 months, right?
I think added to the 32 billion that is now part of cash transfer from government to the
I was going to come to that.
Okay.
But if you do it as 144, the government of Kenya, based on this year's, will be collecting 7 billion in tax per day. Right? About 6.5–7 billion. So that's 20 days of taxation to protect the most vulnerable households in Kenya. That's not a bad choice to make. However, what then Azimio goes and overdoes itself, trips itself, is goes by saying this will be done in addition to other support that government is already doing, which is the 40 billion that gets done. And my view would be there is no reason to do that because you'll be having too many ways of actually distributing money, which will also generate that. Affordability is possible, and government actually would have to cut some money from certain things, make some savings, even if it means getting some new money. And there are lots of things and infrastructure that already exist that they could. So it is possible. It's not unaffordable as everybody seems to think. However, some cuts will have to be made. And my view is, our view at the Institute of Economic Affairs, it's more viable if you actually collapse everything else into a single package so that you're handling it centrally. But redistributing all manner of departments distributing money is how the cash gets lost, and that's how every time the Auditor General goes, usually this part of the money has a problem because people claim they did not receive, but somebody signed up for them. If you have something that India has done, India distributes cash transfers of this kind to 300 million people. So obviously Azimio's dream is not necessarily out of the sky. They can't do it. However, again, it's how you arrange government administration to make sure this thing is clean. We have a very efficient mechanism for mobile money transfers. If you do a registration system through a government registration system and you have specific ways of sending that money, it can be sent centrally, it can be sent very efficiently because banks in Kenya have good reach and we have a telecommunication system that can. But the idea that you want to be everything to every people, instead of saying, look, we'll actually reform the entire cash transfer mechanism that government has, put it in a centralized way, make it more transparent, very, very efficient to reduce the costs and make sure that we can verify who's receiving through some identification mechanism. So that's it. But then, trying to be everything to everyone. So one of the things that most worries me about it is if you're going to do the radical things that Azimio helps to do, I think you have to tell other people that, look, there's some things that government does that we're actually going to pull back. It's easy to say corruption, but it's not easy to say social protection system that is completely non-transparent is one we try. Why? Because you might ruffle some feathers within the public sector, and that has to be done. So the seriousness in terms of governance has to show about communicate clearly to Kenyans that, look, there are certain things we'll have to change for us to be this efficient.
Mention or talk to us briefly, Kwame, before Caroline responds. On the One County, One Product program, there are those who say a national government should not micromanage the rest of the country and force counties to start it shouldn't come from the center. Yeah. The counties themselves should actually have rolled this. We should have seen indications of it over the last 10 years.
I actually think it's not even counties. The people who do manufacturing are private sector. So if I was government, I would actually say, look, we will subsidize counties to tell your private sector, what would you do? What do you want us to do? Whether it's infrastructure, whether it's providing water and all stuff like that. Security that then allows you to build your manufacturing plant here. Not government itself establishing a river tax or whatever it is. So basically what you do is private sector people know. They know. And one of the things that happens in Nairobi, for instance, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers itself did a manifesto. And among the things, as we had a discussion with them, we learned that some counties have resources available, whether it's agricultural, right? But the quality of water for food processing, which is a big sector in this country for manufacturing, because it feeds off agriculture, cannot be done because the quality of water in some of the counties in these places cannot be used to process food. Listen to that. So if I was government, instead of telling them what to do, what do you need that government should provide? Water, if it's the power, three-phase power, if it's specific security, if it's the allocation of land, that's what government should do. But if you're trying to do everything, you're spreading yourself too thin, and that's usually a signal of a government that will be ineffective. So yes, there'll be a lot of motion, but we won't be seeing results. Jubilee times 2.
Carol, the work plan, the work plan that then crystallizes feedback and so forth. What are your thoughts in regards to that? But also something very interesting, and you can also, I know you may have some response to Kwame, administrative continuity. Help Kenyans understand that, because Azimio is already a coalition of parties, and each party, and of course one question was, is this manifesto, does it capture Wiper's thoughts? Does it capture Kanu's thoughts as well? So are all those captured in there? Plus the administrative continuity of a previous regime. What direction would the Azimio government move in with all those thoughts and intentions underpinning it?
Great, thank you. First, let me respond to, not really respond to, just contribute to what perhaps Kwame is saying. He is right. I think it's because this document was launched yesterday, so I think not a lot of people have really gone through the details. The Azimio government is not saying that we will put up factories. No. Yeah. We understand that that space is for private sector. But then how does the government become an enabler for private sector to become sensible players and be able to unlock job opportunities for our people? One, we are talking about waiving some of the planning fees, waiving licenses, and ensuring that for investors, we are deliberate about going to look for investors to come and take up the opportunities. And when we say going, doesn't mean they're out of the country. We have investors who are in this country, positioned in different parts of this country. It's really just telling them, this, for instance, is Kenya's investment handbook. Looking at per county, what are the low-hanging fruits, and what are, for instance, the sensible returns on investment, for instance, for investors. And interesting, these people, perhaps coming up even with a memorandum of information of every county and saying, these are the opportunities as a government that we see, and this is how we will assist you set up. This is how we will ensure, for instance, that, we give you a grace period of, 3, 4, 5 years until you're able to break even, with an assurance, of course, that you will be able to employ our children and bond them. You can bond them, for 2, 3 years, but really employ our youth. Because we are looking at manufacturing not in its end as manufacturing, but really as a way to unlock employment opportunities for the youth. So we know for sure that that is not a space for government to be in, but we know that government is a key catalyst in ensuring that manufacturing agencies and businesses then thrive. So whether we want to open the space to the private sectors, or we want to go PPP. Luckily now, finally, we have, the laws that govern and, that guide, for instance, PPPs in this country. So that will be by case basis. But what we're trying to say is that every county, all the 47 counties in this country, should have a product that they proudly produce and say made in Makueni, made in Nyeri County. So that is to answer the issue of who then is in manufacturing. Issues of administrative continuity. It's not an issue, it's not an area we are currently too worried about. The Jubilee government, to a great extent, has done what they have been able to do. They have delivered, what they have been able to deliver. And in my view, and that is really my view as Carol, I think they have tried under the circumstances. It's a government that has been bedogged by so many things, apart from corruption, a global pandemic, but still, has been able to stand and, still continue. So the continuity, there are government processes as to how to, handing over processes, but we are not trying to say that we will continue with 3.0. We will continue with the Jubilee. No. And like I said at the beginning of this show, of all the contenders of this election, the Azimio coalition is a conglomerate of people who have not been in government. And therefore, matters, if you don't like how Jubilee has handled the things, then you shouldn't be worried that the same will continue in people who have really been out of government, seeking for space to come and reform government. I think, some of these things shouldn't worry you. But there will be, I can tell you, between Azimio and the Jubilee government, because of the goodwill of His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta and the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, we see a smooth transition and handing over of power.
Okay, the voters will have the final say in terms of who forms government moving forward. In the interest of time, let me fire one last question to you, Carol. The place of the Mitumba sector in the Azimio plan, where is it? Because a lot of chatter has gone on about how Azimio views a sector that employs many Kenyans, and I want to give you a chance now to talk about that.
Great. Before I address the Mitumba issue, I want us to just, and I don't know, maybe you're on this table, we are sort of almost age mates, to look back to the days of Rivertex. Look back to the days of Raymond's that we had in every homestead. There was a blanket called Raymond's. Look at the days of butter shoes. What happened to those days? I remember growing up, we wore Kenyan fabric. We wore Kenyan shoes. And somewhere along university, then the Mitumba business became very popular. And what happened is that we were colonized to believe that Kenyan products are wishy-washy and they are not up to par. And you want, as a university student in your, in your teens and your early 20s, you want to wear your first Calvin Klein. The only place you can get that was in Mtindwa. I used to go to Mtindwa market and just over the weekend get a few things and iron them, and you would be a star in university. But ideally, what have we done? We have killed an industry that was employing people. And what Baba said when he talked about phasing out second-hand clothes was really looking at, if you look at the value chain, for instance, of textile. The value chain of textile starts from a cotton farmer, straight into a cotton harvester, to the ginnery, to the textile itself, to the tailor, to the fashion designer, to the tailor. It's a whole value chain that employs a good, for instance, 10, 20 people. If I will choose the Mitumba way, then it will be just myself who is importing and perhaps the person who is unpacking. So, number one, we want to make it clear as the Azimio government that this is an issue that we will deal with transitionally. Nobody plants cotton today and harvests cotton tomorrow and makes a dress tomorrow. This will be an issue that we deal with in a transitional manner. First is to make them understand that by being in the second hand, or the Mitumba business, then you are denying even your child an opportunity to get a job or to be in a job along the value chain of, for instance, cotton. Number two is for these traders to also understand that the government will not just shut down and tell them, cheers, goodbye. They will be mainstreamed in the value chain of the textile industry, for instance. We will understand, so how many Mitumba traders are there? How can we sensibly help them transition into what we are seeing, what we are calling the big idea of manufacturing? And it's not something that the Azimio government is doing by chest thumping. It's really going to be a consultative process that it's going to get to the point that they, as the traders, see the sense as to why we want to stop second-hand clothes and be able to produce our own clothes made in Kenya and become exporters. This country is suffering with a trade deficit. I mean, we are pretty much almost net importers of everything that we have. I mean, there's this joke that goes around that we import even toothpicks. So isn't it time for us to rethink that? Is it time for this nation to say, can we produce our own toothpicks? Can we produce our own clothing lines? Can we produce our own, whatever it is that we are producing, and by this be able to employ our young people who now are jobless and desperate and just happy to go and listen to whatever it is that anybody is peddling.
Kwame, let me get a response from you.
You know, the debate about Mitumba is one that I find very, very... okay, there are people...
Emotive is one of those words, but carry on.
Well, there are people who would respond to the question about Mitumba because of who said it, right? If you're part of a different political coalition, you'll support it regardless, or you will not. But the economics of it tells us that you can ban all Mitumba, but domestic industries will not necessarily thrive, because the IES carried out a study just 2 years old, 1.5 years ago, when COVID started, and we actually found that Kenyans do not use Mitumba as an alternative for new clothes. Often, people are looking for complementary things. So, for instance, many Kenyans buy uniforms. They buy fleece for their kids and everything else, right? They buy new clothes. And when they look for other styling or they're looking for other things, they buy the others. So the idea that you have to squash Mitumba so that these other domestic industries grow is actually not borne by people. The second one is a freedom question. And I agree that government might have a responsibility or should try to foster domestic cotton industry. But I don't think that
building demand in the market, maybe.
But that shouldn't be done by telling other people, we will choose what you wear. Some people might be very proud of the fabrics produced in Kenya. I am an agnostic. Some of it is bad. Some of it is good, but some is bad. And I should be allowed that freedom to be able to choose. Some of it is bad. I wouldn't even take it for free. Well, maybe I'm a privileged Kenyan. But the point is this.
You are.
Allow Kenyans to be able, treat Kenyans like adults, that we can make these decisions. So if you want to support the domestic cotton industry, go ahead and support it. But don't force Kenyans, somebody who wakes up and does honest labor, goes out there, buys Mitumba, because Mitumba also has its own value chain. From the exports, the people who do the transportation, the packing, the people who do the washing, they also do cutting up and actually reworking it to the other day. So we all can be allowed to actually work without necessarily insisting that your diet at home can only be this because that's what's grown in Kenya, and your kids must put on this because somebody who has a cotton farm has to be forced to sell that cotton farm. I mean, it's not compatible with a democracy and our freedom. So on the basis of both the economics and all that, I think Azimio needs to rethink this. It is not a good idea, and many people are. Some people are resisting you because of who said it. Many of them are worth ignoring, but there are people who are giving you very solid evidence that, look, you are going to make unnecessary damage to other people's jobs just because you have decided that you should choose for people what to wear.
Kwame, I think it's a good point to take a break. We come back. I've seen a lot of your messages. I'll read a few, get a parting shot from each of my guests, and we will wrap it up. 22422 is the SMS line. Hashtag Newsnight, digging deep into that manifesto. And I know Kenyans are asking questions, and we are getting some answers here. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break.